Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Pyle. Thank you for inviting me to talk and kind of blabber my thoughts about technology to all of you. So my background is, in undergrad I actually studied transhumanist philosophy and neuroscience, and I've been working as a research assistant in a neurobiology lab. But outside of that, I'm also an artist and a community organizer. And some of the things that I think really deeply about are how the sort of conceptions we have around futurism, cyborg, sci-fi are often dominated by very particular narratives and perspectives. And oftentimes, in the world we know it, this means that it's a very Western perspective on what the future looks like. It's a very white perspective. It's a very male perspective. The sort of dominant power structures control the stories that we get to have about what we can imagine, about the future ahead of us. So my work is really interested in thinking about what this future could look like if we kind of broaden the horizons and broaden the imagination we have to sort of think about it. So I really think a lot about time travel, about cyborgs and science fiction, and how science fiction is maybe not a fiction, but a reality that we've actually been living all along. So that's sort of the background of the talk that I'm going to do, so hopefully you can follow along. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards if something is inaccessible or isn't making sense. Cool, so with that, our ancestors were cyborgs, and so are we. So when we're talking about human augmentation, we're essentially also defining what it means to be human. Whenever we're thinking about what it means to change who we are, we're also talking about what it is that we're starting with. So for us, we're using the human as a starting point, and we're moving towards something that's maybe more post-human or more cyborg. I think implicit in this idea of augmentation is this sort of notion that we're moving towards something. There is a linearity that comes with it. And in particular, a lot of the talks have focused on how we're using technology to really make this change. So technology is allowing us from going from human, which is where we are now, to something that's more post-human. So we're already forming categories about past, present, and future when we're thinking about these concepts. So what I'm interested in doing is not really offering any new knowledge, but maybe just putting out a framework for how we can think about these categories and these terms that we're taking for granted. In particular, I want us to complicate what we call human, what we call technology, and what we call post-human or cyborg, which is another term that I'm going to be throwing out there. And hopefully show you that maybe it's not a very linear progression. I'm hoping that we can kind of complicate this idea of moving from past and present to future, but really show that maybe we're moving within something that's happening all at once. So if you're still with me, I'm going to keep going from there. So first off, when I say post-human or cyborg, when I'm throwing these terms out there, what are the things that come to mind? And you can just shout them out. So it can be colors, ideas.
Terminator.
Yeah, can you, maybe louder?
Terminator.
Terminator.
Ford.
Okay.
Robot.
Robots.
No values.
No values. Ooh, that's a scary one. Any other ones?
Medical devices.
Medical devices. Okay.
Longer life.
Longer life. Interesting.
Matrix.
Matrix.
Apocalypse.
Apocalypse! So I guess the kind of theme that I'm picking up from this is that a lot of the visions we have about cyborgs or post-humans are very metallic. There's a kind of shininess, there's a newness, there's this notion of devices or robots, something that isn't so squishy and soft maybe. So with that in mind, if I say human, what are the things that come to mind? Squishy and soft. What else? Emotions, love,
Connection.
Ooh, connection, culture. What is it? Consciousness. Okay. So a lot of these ideas seem to really be based in emotion, seem to be based in something that isn't so easily quantified, maybe so not really easily built. So we're already kind of seeing a dichotomy come up just from people shouting out these suggestions. And it sort of seems like we've created these categories in our mind already, right? Where the human is something that's biological. It's something that's maybe formed of flesh. It has emotions. It has thoughts, feelings. And then the cyborg or the post-human, on the other hand, is more synthetic. You know, we're something that's built from our technologies, something that can, be broken down into algorithms or numbers or devices or materials. So I think it's really interesting that oftentimes when we look at the future, we are sort of already creating these boundaries around what it means to be human and what it means to move towards something else. And in particular, I'm really interested in thinking about the human as something that's bounded versus the future human as something that's unbounded. And what I mean by this is that oftentimes when we think of the body or the human, we sort of see it as ending where our skin ends. You know, there is something that's very internal. We have these thoughts, these feelings, and they're encased in these like meat sacks that we carry around with us. And then when we think about something like a cyborg or a post-human, you know, a lot of people have brought up things like genetic manipulation. They've brought up drones, you know, using new technologies and devices that sort of allow us to think of the body as a lot more expanded, right? When we think about a drone that can be controlled and go somewhere else to grab something for us, in a lot of ways we're seeing that our body can actually expand beyond our skin. So we're allowing ourselves to imagine a future where we're co-evolving with the world around us. So basically what I'm trying to say is that when we think about technology in the future, we're thinking about shifting our conditions of embodiment. In particular, what it means to be human, what it means to have a body, and navigate through space that way. So, what I think is really interesting from the talks today is that when we think about what it means to shift our ideas of embodiment, yeah, we do think about technologies like genetic editing, drones, cybernetics, virtual reality, all of these exciting things that we're developing or that we often see in, you know, science fiction movies and novels. But we also have a lot of these technologies already present in the world around us, right? We have robots, we have pacemakers, artificial retinas, brain implants are things that exist. All of these technologies are present, and there are people around us who are already, you know, using these things to shift their conditions of embodiment and survive in the world around us. And on top of that, we can also think about things like psychedelics, like herbs, like yoga, fashion, lived environments, medicine. We don't often see these things as futuristic technology, but they do allow us to shift how we view our bodies and how we navigate through space. And if you think about that sort of broader definition of what technology can be, I think it allows us to see that we've all actually been augmenting ourselves all along. You know, whether it's through a pacemaker, or whether it's through taking a medicine or a vaccine, we've always been shifting what it means for us to exist in space. And with that idea as well, I think we can also think even broader about the ways in which our ancestors and the people before us have been doing this work, right? I think that it's a very sort of narrow and colonial perspective to see technology as only being this particular metallic, shiny thing. There are a lot of ways in which the communities around us have been living concurrently with their environments, with nature, with other creatures and other individuals to create new ways of seeing themselves and surviving in different spaces. So essentially what I'm saying is that our communities and ancestors have always been augmenting themselves with their environments to survive dystopias. One of the big ideas around science fiction is that the reason that we have to evolve and sort of create technologies is because we're trying to survive in some sort of environmental hellscape, right? Whether it's dystopia, whether it's something like impending climate change, some sort of artificial apocalypse, there's a sort of pressure that forces us to have to shift what it means to be human so that we can survive and continue to survive. But if you really think about it, for marginalized communities who have always been existing in a world where their knowledge systems and bodies aren't valued, they've always had to develop technologies and ways of existing in these dystopias. Whether it's indigenous communities that have existed concurrently with nature in order to survive the onslaught of colonial genocide, or thinking about enslaved people who had come up with codes and systems to survive under enslavement. People have always been finding ways to use the world around them and shift what it means to exist in their bodies so that they can survive. And so a few examples, I just want to point to a few examples because I don't have a lot of time. The first picture is actually an enslaved woman. So there was this practice that a lot of enslaved women and men did in the South where they would do this thing called fancy dress. Has anyone heard of this? No? So basically, it was a way in which enslaved people would put on these really elaborate, beautiful outfits and go off into the forest to have parties when the masters weren't home or weren't really like watching them. And an important thing that the women did was that they would take a lot of the vines that were lying around the plantations and stiffen them into petticoats. And they would use a lot of starch as well so that they could form them into these elaborate petticoats to put underneath their clothes. So what happened was, these people would be out, they'd be partying, but as soon as someone caught wind that a slave owner was coming or could potentially find them, everyone would start running. And the women, as they would run, their starched petticoats would make these popping noises. And so as they were running, the children who were often at home would listen for the popping, and it would alert them that a slave master was coming and that their families had to get into the house quickly. So as they listened for the popping noise, they would be able to open up the doors, make sure everyone could come in. They knew that it was their family and not a slave master or someone else trying to sneak in. So essentially, the body became a starting point for not only experiencing pleasure, but also as a way of creating community safety, using plants and fashion as a way of augmenting the form to do that. Another really cool example that a lot of people have touched on is the use of psychedelics and herbs. So an ayahuasca ceremony, for example, is a way of coming out of the body and kind of expanding what it means to be present in a space. It allows us to think of the self as more disembodied, and it's something that indigenous people in non-Western traditions have been using for ages in order to better understand the self and navigate. Another really cool example that I think most people don't think about are tattoos and body modification in that sense. So this is a picture of a traditional Southeast Asian yantra tattoo. And these tattoos are hand-poked, they contain a number of beautiful symbols, and were often put onto the body as a means of protection. So often in like Khmer regions or other Southeast Asian regions, these tattoos would be a way of fortifying the body against spiritual demons, but also in imbuing strength into the form through the sort of artistic practice. So once again, these aren't really things that we think of as cyborg-forming technologies or as futuristic technologies, but I think if we're expanding our definition of what it means to be human, what it means to have technology, we can see that there have been these cool practices going on for ages, and that whenever we're engaging in a practice of futurism, we're invoking the past and present and working within a broader context of technology and embodiment. Which is to say that whenever we're thinking about the future, we're kind of invoking the work that our ancestors have been doing. We're thinking about historical practices that inform the technology we're using and inform our ideas about what the body is. We're invoking ideas about the present moment and thinking about the different demands around us and the environmental changes that are forcing us to adapt in particular ways. The future doesn't have to be this far-off concept. It's something that we're actively engaging in every day. And to me, that's really exciting. It means that we do have agency and we do have this exciting way of using our imaginations to actually enact change and make a difference, not only for ourselves, but also for the communities around us. So yeah, with that being said, the future isn't that far away. It's already happening. We're making it happen. And it's something that we've been making happen this whole time. So yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.